Welcome everybody, I'm Garry Adelman with the American Battlefield Trust. Really excited to be here with Ranger Mike Gorman here at the Richmond National Battlefield Park. We are at Fort Harrison, and this is one of the most photographed forts of the entire Civil War. Mike, what is Fort Harrison and why did they photograph it?
Well, Fort Harrison is one of the outer defenses of Richmond. And in September of 1864, September 29th, 1864, Union troops overran and captured this fort. This is the closest they've ever come to capturing Richmond. So people were interested. This was front page news throughout the North. And so with the victory here at Fort Harrison came photographers. Within a month of the capture of Fort Harrison, photographers showed up here. And that's what I want to really focus on here today. Not just the battle, but what it meant to people. Remember, when we see these photographs, this is an expression of interest. This is an expression of, I want to show you something that you're going to want to buy. It's reflecting people's interest in the North about this place. And one of the coolest photographs was taken from, well, right where you're looking from. It was this, looking up at Fort Harrison from down below. Right now, we are right here. This shows you what the Union troops would have seen as they proceeded to capture Fort Harrison. This large earthwork right here is to your left. I say that because they didn't stop there. One of Brady's cameramen got just above where you are now and took this image, looking out into captured Fort Harrison, but also into the new Confederate lines over here. This is a fascinating image because there's so much in it. Look at the Pioneer down here. There he is, just to your left.
And is he awake, Mike?
It's hard to tell. He looks like he's relaxing pretty well.
He is crashed, probably from, chopping things down and building things.
He's right. He's got his shovel here. He's got his pick. He is done. He's taking a rest. Right? But if you look at this grouping of people right here and you blow them up, which you can do now, thanks to the Library of Congress, you can actually see a cap device that says 158. That's the 158th New York. That's the only 158th anything anywhere nearby. So we have definitive proof that this is the 158th New York in this photograph. Now that wasn't it. The photographers were not done. This is in October. White troops of the 18th Corps had garrisoned the fort. And the photographers were interested in this not just because this is a front line action now. Remember, this had been counterattacked by the Confederates. This is a battleground itself, an active front. And the Confederates are entrenching over there. But the best view is not going to be from there. It's going to be from this large earthwork over here. Check this out.
And as we walk, just keep in mind, so once you take a historic photo and find out when and where it was taken, suddenly that photo becomes a great primary resource, rich in information, arguably as rich as any other historical source of information. So when you find out when and where it was taken, suddenly it not only opens up little windows to the past, we know exactly what this field looked like because of that photo. At least we know what it looked like in late 1864. But suddenly we can determine, okay, these are some of the troops that were there. Oh my God, there's a fence there. There were trees in the distance. Look how open it was toward the Confederate lines. So you can really go far and come to understand history a little bit better by scrutinizing photographs, and wait till you see this one.
In October, Brady's cameraman got right up on the earthwork behind us. We call this the Great Traverse, and took this image looking out right here. So this earthwork here is directly in our front.
And if I may, by this time too, you're talking about not Fort Harrison anymore, right, Mike?
Well, this is not Fort Harrison. They've called it Fort Burnham. They renamed it in honor of the Union general who was killed right back where we started talking about these photographs. He was killed right there on these earthworks.
It's not surprising. Confederates and Union soldiers use different names for battles. They use different names for armies. Why wouldn't they honor their own people in their own forts?
So it's two forts in one. You've got Confederate Fort Harrison, Union Fort Burnham. And what's so cool about this image is not just that you're looking out over Union Fort Burnham, but you're also looking towards the Confederate lines that are being built to enclose the gap that had been made when Fort Harrison was captured. And you can actually see, look, they're not done yet. There's what they're going to call Fort Beauregard. Way out there, you can see some Union picket posts starting to be formed out there, and this is deep blow up. Unfortunately, we don't have a high-res view of this negative until Brady's men leave, and T.C. Roche and Andrew Jackson Russell, 2 photographers, found this fort and took a similar view the next month. And I'd like to call your attention to who's down here. Right there are United States colored troops.
Check those guys out.
Note this guy right here. He's swinging his leg. He doesn't care. He's right over there. But look at his cap device. 7B. 7th United States Colored Troops. Company B. These are men that had been at Fort Gilmer, fighting men. Now replacing the white troops as the garrison of Fort Burnham. What makes that so important? Now that we know who these men are, and that they're the ones here at Fort Harrison, when you go into the deep background, you see this. Now that we know the 7th USCT was garrisoning Fort Harrison, those pickets are black troops. That is the now completed Fort Beauregard. Those are Confederates on the fort. These are Confederates standing next to a tent about 50 yards away. Union and Confederate soldiers in the same photograph.
Let me stress how rare this is. Sure, we have a couple of instances of Union photographers photographing, Yankees shooting in Charleston Harbor, but they're on the same side there. We also have instances of a Union photographer at Fredericksburg taking photos of Confederates across the river. But in an active war zone, Union and Confederate soldiers in the same shot, is this unique?
This is unique. If one of these men starts shooting their rifle, war is going to jump off. It speaks to the sort of sitzkrieg that's going on here. These men have an unspoken agreement. I'm not going to fire if you don't. We don't need to make each other's lives miserable.
And that is not unique. We know that before the Battle of Fort Stedman. We know it countless times where Union and Confederate soldiers, especially as the war went on, they weren't interested in just killing each other. They were absolutely into the business of fighting when they needed to, but no reason to needlessly make your life even worse than it would have otherwise been by constantly sniping at each other for 6 months.
And made more important and made more interesting by the fact that these are white and black men acknowledging each other as soldiers by engaging in that pact. I think that is a very powerful thing. Not just soldiers, but white and black men. And when you blow it up, you can see this entire active front. From left to right, here at Fort Harrison. Look at the Union pickets in their picket holes out there in the field. Fort Beauregard in the distance, with the Confederate soldiers standing upon it. And the woods at the right, which had been used during the counterattack and the Battle of Fort Harrison by the Confederates to stretch their lines and make them look bigger than they were. It's all shown here in this primary source. I cannot stress that enough. What you're looking at is as it actually occurred, and none of the people in this image were posing. None of them knew or cared that they were being photographed. So you're getting a very, very instantaneous view of what life was like right here at this spot.
Candid Civil War. And
yes.
let me lead in to say that, first of all, another shout out to the Library of Congress, who has painstakingly digitized the collection. They have the largest collection of original Civil War glass plates when it comes to the documentary images, and they have not only digitized them, they digitized them in such high resolution that you can take one negative that is about this big or this big and blow it up to this tiny portion of that photo and make it 6 feet long. I can't stress this enough, and Mike and I don't have any sort of a claim to doing this stuff.
No, it's not magic.
Go to just Google Prints and Photographs Library of Congress. You'll see a great catalog. Type in something that interests you, Gettysburg, Fort McAllister, and just start playing around, and you will discover things on your own. I promise you, if you download the high-res version, you see photos within photos, and you can become the historian if you're not one already.
And believe me, we want you to. Our next shot is right over here.
Now, Mike, as we walk, I'm just curious, so you noted that there were white troops here, the 158th New York was over there.
Correct.
Then there were USCTs here, so the way I gather it, you didn't just go to a fort and stay there. Things are active and moving around.
Things are active and moving around, especially as October turns into November. So you have the action at 2nd Fair Oaks, that's north of here. The white troops go up there and fight, leaving the fort in the care of the USCTs. They're going to stay for about 6 months. Remember, this is going to carry us through the election. This is going to carry us through the winter. This is their home. This is their home for almost 6 months. All around us, as you saw in the photograph, were these buildings, these huts. And, you know, this was their camp. And they were made of wood. So it's very clear that if the Confederates had really wanted to engage this and really make their lives miserable, they could have. But they didn't. Neither side really wanted to make this an active and hot front. Occasionally there was mortar fire, occasionally there were picket skirmishes, but by and large this is a quiet front. And I really want to show that at our next stop where we can match up another shot that is truly remarkable right over here.
All right, well, let me do a walk and talk while Mike sets this up here, because I think this is interesting. You know, people today love saying, you know, well, if I was in the Civil War, I'd have commanded it this way or I'd have done that. It is not enough to just break through a line, okay? So the Yankees capture this fort, right? What do the Confederates do? They build another fort further in. What do the Union do? They make the fort better on this side so it can face the other direction. It's not so simple to break through a line and maintain control over that line, let alone to move on towards your objective. So I think that this place that was a Confederate fort, the Yankees capture it, Lee and company try to capture it back, and then they can't, and then it's refaced, and the Union, what are they facing? Another fort just as powerful, although they're a little bit closer to Richmond. This is complicated stuff, and even when you succeed, it's not that easy to drive home your final point. Let's walk over to Mike to check out a particularly cool area here.
Gary, you really hit on something important, which is that the objective for this battle, when it stepped off, was to capture Richmond, to end the war in September of 1864. Didn't work. But once captured, now this becomes a hot front. You have to keep troops north of James River, Robert E. Lee. You have to, because we're up here. The United States Army is here. And that means that Lee's front stretches for almost 75 miles. Think about that. And you've got about 65,000 men to cover that. It's going to be tough. So that's part of the objective too. And we can say that this does not conclusively end the war. Oh, well, let's not pay attention to that. No, you have to. Remember, these are the troops that are going to capture Richmond. But think about the military situation the Confederates find themselves in October of 1864, with a front of 75 miles, with an election looming that it's not looking so good right now that Lincoln's going to be booted out of office. The war is going to go on and on. So when the election results were known, through here, every day, Confederate deserters. Every day, taking in more and more prisoners.
I think what you're saying is because the Confederates at that point, that was one of their last great hopes.
Exactly.
That, you know, Americans would elect a president who lacked, you know, the desire to continue this war, that might settle for peace. That's not happening after the election.
And you knew it. If you're a Confederate and you got the word that Lincoln had been reelected, are you thinking to yourself, no problem, we can do this for 4 more years?
No way.
A lot of people voted with their feet.
All right, what do we got here?
Well, this is one of the coolest shots of the fort, which is taken from right about here. And it's looking towards what used to be a Union bomb-proof. A bomb-proof is a room or a chamber cut into an earthwork where you could go during a bombardment and be safe. And you can even see that it's pretty large. You can see where it's collapsed. Look along the earthwork here, and then you can see it go right up, right there. So from that point, that's solid earth. And from that point, that's a collapsed bomb-proof, right there. So you've got about 25 yards of this bomb-proof, the entrance of which was right over here. And if you don't believe me, note the presence of this limber chest.
It's so cool.
Which was in this depression right here. This limber chest would have served a cannon which was facing over that wall.
And a limber chest, of course, holds what you need to shoot out of the cannon, and it also includes instructions on what fuses and what range you might want to use. It has range tables and other things on the inside of the lid, and this is just about the only photo I've ever seen that shows some of that.
Right. And as you can see, here's the limber itself. They've taken the chest off it and placed it in this little depression, right where we're standing. Now, I'd like to point out again, these are white officers. Remember, United States colored troops were commanded by white officers. Do you think he's very concerned about his safety? He's standing on that wall of the fort. The Confederates are right over there. It really speaks to that quiet front. Don't fire if we don't have to.
Just two more things about this photo I always like to point out too is, first of all, you can see this earthwork over there, but note, it has revetments on it. Aha! We can look at the remnants of these particular works, but they are not like they were back then. They were even stronger with chevaux de frise and abatis and all sorts of other French military things out and on them. And then here, the actual door, probably from a house nearby, Mike?
Who knows?
I mean, it's a bomb-proof,
glass.
and it looks like they have glass on the door of the bomb-proof. That seems a little weird. So I think what we're going to do now is take a little break. We'll pick up 50 yards from here and see you in a sec.
One of the cool things about Fort Harrison is not just that it has these amazing images, but it's 2-in-1. It's a Confederate fort that becomes a Union fort. How does that happen? Because of what happened right here. Before these earthworks were even built, this was the site of the Union stand during the Confederate counterattack. And I can't stress enough, the Library of Congress has not only digitized their photographs at incredible resolution, also their sketches that were made by William Woad and Alfred Woad and others that were actually on the ground during the event. So while we look at these photographs, and they're usually taken in situations of repose and quiet, these were made while the action was actually taking place. And so you can imagine these men, these Union soldiers here, in a line right about where this earthwork is now.
And just to be clear, these guys are there because, well, they couldn't be on the other earthwork. It's facing the wrong way. That wouldn't be defensible. And they can't just go over there. The Confederates could go right up to the edge of it and recapture the fort. So they had to be out here, even though they didn't have these earthworks yet?
Correct. That's absolutely correct. And we know that they probably had some form of rudimentary earthwork, but nothing like this. This is going to come later. So what you see here when you come to Fort Harrison is not what they had on September 29th, 1864, or even the next day when the Confederates counterattacked. This is what they left behind on April 3rd, 1865. It goes through a massive period of change. And you got to know that when you come out here. But this sketch takes us back to that counterattack on the 30th of September. And you can see the Confederates coming right at this position and being mowed down by the Union troops, some of which had repeating rifles. A battlefield on September 29th, a battlefield on September 30th, and then a fort until April 3rd, 1865.
And this is great. Let's just go over to our next stop here, unless you have something else to say.
No, I have something really amazing to show you at our next stop.
All right, well, let's go over there. You take us to the spot, Mike,
Right.
because again, you know, we are only showing a smattering of the photo resources and the sketch resources available here at Fort Harrison. We encourage you, again, go to the Library of Congress, get a book, and especially come here to Fort Harrison, to the coolest fort you've never been to. And Mike's going to pick it up from here.
One of the things that is truly astonishing when you go onto the Library of Congress website is that they've scanned a lot of the negatives, but the captions aren't necessarily correct. And one of the things that blew my mind was when I was researching a photo program for Petersburg. And I found this image, which was labeled as Petersburg. But when I went down there and asked them, where do you think this was taken? They were like, I've never seen that before. And next to that in the catalog was another image that just happened to make a panorama. And because of the images that I had looked at before, especially the one from the Great Traverse that showed the USCTs, I could recognize trees in the background that I knew were Fort Harrison and put these together. The camera was right behind you, looking out towards the Confederate lines in April of 1865, once those have been evacuated. You can see this ditch right there. That's the same one. You can see Fort Beauregard in the distance that we looked at before. Now absent Confederate defenders. But this is the view that Union troops had all through the winter of 1865, looking towards their Confederate foes, right here at Fort Harrison. So when we talk about these photographs, and even in this video, I think, we give a sense that we have seen it all, and we know what's out there. We don't. There's still more to find. There's still a frontier. And I hope you all will help us push it.
Absolutely. Richmond is one of, by my calculation and by Mike's, the most or the second or third most photographed place of the Civil War. It depends which mood we're in at that time. There's lots more to do. Come out here, if you can. Do the research on the Library of Congress. More than anything, thanks so much for sharing all this with us today, Mike, and thank you for watching.